Morning, everybody. I agree with Suniti that we cannot look at personality in assessing whether the PNM should select Mrs. Beckles-Robinson or Dr. Rowley. And she gave an indication of what some of the things are that we should be considering, and to my mind those things relate to the general election. But taking us back to the internal election of the PNM, some of the questions that I think should be answered by anybody who wishes to lead a political party, and especially in the context of the PNM's internal election, I would want to find out what is the communication plan for the party, internal and external communication plans. I would want to find out how would you make the party more attractive across the board. I would like to know how would you make government more accountable to the party. If the party gets into government, what kind of linkage are you going to forge between the government and the party to make the government more accountable to the party? And I would also want to know what would you do differently from former leaders, and in the case of Dr. Rowley, what would you do differently if you have another term? So those are some of the questions that I would like answered, and so far maybe I missed some stuff, but I have not been seeing these issues raised. Also, as a female in leadership, I would want to see Mrs. Beckles-Robinson more strategic in her approach to some of the issues that are taking place. Like, for example, Dr. Rowley has just made a statement concerning the education system, the girls who were fighting in the schools and the road and so on. And to my mind, a great part of her strategy can rest on that statement that was made, because he made a statement that was designed to sink him, and he should be sunk very deep with that kind of statement that he made about the girls fighting in the road. So, but I'm talking about strategy and political acumen, and the need for women in politics to be a lot more politically strategic. Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to say something in relation to the last question. The question for women fighting campaigns in the case of the PNM election, and over the last couple of days I've gone back over a lot of the newspaper articles on Mrs. Beckles-Robinson since about 2011 on, in order to try and see what have been the ways that what have been the tensions and the trajectories. And it's interesting, currently, even in the last couple of months, there's a way that when you are going up for the leadership post against the dominant leader, you must constantly reiterate your loyalty. So you can't attack the way that you will be attacked. And you will be attacked, and that shows up all the time. I think there was an article in the Newsday about if you're a woman enough to do something, right? But you certainly can't speak to your political leader in public and say, well, if you're a man enough, right, to do X, because even not only questioning his leadership, but his masculinity makes you persona non grata. And so I think what's interesting for me in even doing some of the media analysis is that candidates are operating in two different discursive terrains completely, and have to think about their strategies in those ways. So that how is it that there must, and the women who are speaking out are all speaking out on the basis of loyalty. There are constant invocations of loyalty to the party, to the leader, even the women's arm, and so on. What place is there for women who want to be critical of the leader and critical of the party in that context? Is there any successful language to use, and what is that successful language? And I want to just pick up on something that Mrs. Bart Alexander said, which is the opportunity offered by taking up a women's rights position. whether it is the case of the advocacy being done by the National Union of Domestic Employees, or whether it is the absolute homophobia of the PNM, which I want to say again, we saw in the debates on the Children's Act of Trinidad and Tobago, and it's absolutely inexcusable what then occurred in that legislation because of that kind of homophobia. Whether it's the case of the national gender policy. These issues are not taken up have not been taken up by the women in the PNM, to the extent that to take them up in a campaign is to come off as opportunistic, right? And when they're taken up when they were taken up by the Prime Minister at various levels, to then not be followed through, the kind of disappointment that follows in terms of building that kind of constituency or being able to have a critical position on the basis of coming from a gender equality politics, makes it very difficult, because if you take it up in the campaign but then you don't follow through, then you are establishing that that this was a politics of opportunity, not a politics of principle. But I think that where women candidates, women politicians across the region in interviews will say, we don't represent women, we represent everybody, and that is in fact their job. Their job is to transform for greater justice, economic justice and gender justice widely. But because one hopes that they are able to bring an analysis of inequality, one of the very things that they're fighting, that they will take up these issues. And I know the women's movement would encourage Ms. Beckles-Robinson to take up gender issues the same way it encouraged Mrs. Campbell-Prasad-Bessessa to take up these gender issues, but to in fact take them up in a way that requires that there is a momentum and a support for them that comes from the bottom, so that when you get into power, the bottom in your party, the groups on the ground in your party, those who have the power across constituencies can in fact back you up when the legislation and the policies need to actually be put in place. Or else I think that'll just add to the disappointment. I want to just say too that for me, the People's National Movement has not, and the partnership government has, as we all know, lost huge amounts of ground, but the People's National Movement for me has not been able to widen its ground past where it was, outside of what it's been able to gain from partnership disappointment. And that is a very sad story, because you've been given several years on the basis of policy rather than just electoral victory. And electoral victories are a battle. You win on the basis of peacock and talk and excitement, and you don't necessarily win on the basis of actual formulations of what you will do when you then get into office, the specifics. And for me, there's been a lost opportunity to do that in all this time, and perhaps if it can be taken up in the campaign, it can help from now to 2015 create a public discourse where attention is paid to what can actually happen after 2015, not just one where it is about a battle and whatever blows score that battle, score that victory, are the ones that become justified in the end.